Welcome to a training session on Robert's Rules of Order. Today's topic is the conduct of business, and we're focusing on the parts of Robert's Rules that address running a meeting. This is the first training session put together by the Cascadia E-Unit, which is the new virtual study group for Robert's Rules of Order that we're setting up in the Pacific Northwest. So just some organizational information on what we're doing before we go into the training. So this group is organized within the National Association of Parliamentarians. It's associated with the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians, but we would welcome people outside of Oregon to join us. And the intention of this group is to provide a way to study parliamentary procedure in Oregon outside of the Portland metro area. There are groups that meet physically in the Portland metro area, and so it's great to go into a room and discuss these issues, but it's very difficult for people who live, physically a 6-hour drive away to join in. So we are doing our best to mimic that experience through the miracle of the internet. So we'll be using Zoom for our meetings, and we will be going through a series of these training seminars so that we can provide that experience to people outside of Portland. Your membership options. You're welcome just to check in and listen to the pieces that you would like to, but we would really like for you to become a member, and I think you would derive a lot of benefits from being a member. To become a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians, all you need to do is pass a quiz, and once you pass the quiz and demonstrated just sort of general knowledge of parliamentary procedure, then you're eligible to become a member. You can be a provisional member, which is a member before you pass the exam, and you can attend all the meetings until you pass the quiz. And for both, for two of us, we were provisional members for about a year before we passed our first exam and then joined up. So there is a nominal fee to join the groups. The president of the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians has pledged to offer scholarships for anyone for whom the fees are a barrier. So if you would like to apply for one of the scholarships, you're more than welcome to contact me, and I will see what I can do about getting that taken care of. In terms of the exams, there's the admission exam, which they call a quiz. The next level of exams are 5, and those are the ones that you need to pass within a 9-month period in order to become a registered parliamentarian. I've not attained that one yet, and that's a tall order, but I plan to do that someday. For people who would like to take exams and have access to the Portland area, we are scheduled to give exams on July 27th and August 31st. However, any current member of the National Association of Parliamentarians in Oregon can administer the exams for you. We have members in Medford and Salem and Eugene, and I know there's one in Pendleton. So if you are interested in taking the exams locally, we can figure out a way to get them proctored for you. If you would like to sign up for the exams, please go to the website pdpo.org and say, and let us know who you are, and we will do our best to make arrangements for you. Showing the slide on reference materials. So these are the 2 books that you should acquire. The entrance exam to the National Association of Parliamentarians. Allegedly, if you master the material, excuse me, in the yellow book, Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised in brief, you can pass the exam. So 80% of the material you need in Robert's Rules is summarized in this book, and it should enable you to pass the initial exam. The full book is what you need if you ever get really into the material, because you find yourself referencing the different chapters on discussions over how to interpret points of order in the material. So you really need to own that as well. You can get a CD version from the National Association of Parliamentarians, and it's a bit more expensive, but the beauty of that is that it has search capabilities. So if you're looking for committees, you can get all the references to committees by just putting in one search term, and it speeds up the process of tracking down the references that you're trying to cite.
Hey, Larry.
Yeah,
Real quick, before we go on, and we have a few people that are watching here. Hi, everybody. I just want to, could you summarize really quickly why this is important to know these rules? Just take a couple minutes to explain how important these are in terms of meeting structure and what we're talking about here.
absolutely. So if you go to the next slide, this slide says, why do you need to study?
Thank you. I just should have waited. My bad.
So believe it or not, the concept of majority rule and democracy is very difficult for many people in power to accept. There seems to be this tendency to, once you get in power, is to take more power, and we're finding this happening everywhere. And so the, studying the subject matter is the best way to understand when your rights are being withheld or being compromised. And if you're in a meeting and you feel like something is going on and it doesn't feel right, you're probably going to be hesitant to speak up if you don't know the rules of the game. And so by studying this material, you can push back and assert your rights. One of the sessions will be about the process called appealing from the ruling of the chair, which is how you really get across the idea of majority rule, because it takes a decision that the chair has made and it moves that decision back on the assembly. And they are the ones that get to vote and decide by majority rule how to interpret what point of order has been made. So that's going to be a really exciting one to show up for. But yeah, you need to know the rules in order to play the game.
Well, and just from what I've heard from you and from other people's experience, there's often times when the people that are running these meetings don't know the rules themselves, and it's up to us to be that check and balance.
Yes. So, an example of what's going on right now is that there's two groups that have decided that they are going to close the credentialing table at the beginning of the meeting, and anyone who arrives late can't be credentialed. This is happening in the Democratic Party of Oregon for the state central committee meetings, and this is happening in one of the counties. This is a flat-out violation of Robert's Rules of Order, because one of your fundamental rights as a member of the assembly is to participate in the discussion and the debate and to vote. And what these groups have done is that they decided that they're going to cut off credentialing, and so anyone who shows up late cannot participate, which means that a minority group has taken away the rights of individuals. So it is possible to do this because Robert's Rules allows for a majority of the assembly to make those kinds of decisions, but it's not appropriate for a committee within that organization to make those kinds of decisions. And people go along, they walk in, they go up to the credentials desk, they say, "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm ready, I'm here and I'm ready to go." And they're told, "Oh, I'm sorry, you traveled 2 hours to get to this meeting, but we're not going to let you participate." What do? Do they think, well, they typically say, "Oh, well, that's too bad. I guess I'll go away and never come back." If you were a little more assertive, like they were at the state central committee meeting earlier, someone who showed up late found me and asked me, "What can we do?" We appealed the decision of the credentials chair and had the credentials committee reopen so she could participate in the meeting. And she really did travel 2 hours to get there. So unless you know the rules and what your rights are, it's very difficult to demand them. So on the meeting slide, so this is really about where the rules come into play is our meetings. And it's really about a deliberative assembly that has the following characteristics. It's a group of people acting in concert and meeting to determine courses of action to be taken in the name of the group. There's different kinds of groups. There's mass meetings where you don't know who the membership is. What we're talking about really today are meetings where the membership is known and you know if you're entitled to participate. So there's some conditions for which the meeting needs to have. So the group meets together under conditions where everyone can be heard equally. This is extended to electronic meetings. So the phrase "everyone can be heard equally" means that you can't have the speaker only able to speak and everyone else on mute. You have to, for this to be a valid meeting, any participant in the meeting should be able to raise a point of order and speak and get the attention of the chair. Persons having the right to participate are free to act according to their own judgment. So, this is all about the freedom and living in a democracy. And in any decision made, the opinion of each member has equal weight as expressed by voting. We don't have people with super votes, and we don't have members without votes. Everyone who's a member of the assembly has equal votes. So what we'll be talking about today are two chapters within Robert's Rules. There's chapter 11, where we'll cover the concept of a quorum and the order of business, and then chapter 12, where we'll talk about the rules governing assignment of the floor and the rules governing debate.
Hey, Larry, real quick, is there an online resource for this, a PDF or anything with any of the basic information? I dropped a link to something in the rundown description on YouTube, but I was just wondering if you were aware of any other resources.
There are there's lots of resources out there. The thing to remember is that underlying all of the various rules of orders are the concepts of parliamentary procedure, and those are things that you need to understand, and that's what we'll be going through in our next session, so everyone understands the foundational pieces. The rules of order that we will be focusing on are the most commonly used in the United States, which are Robert's Rules of Order. There are other flavors of rules of order out there, and there's some that are a little bit more drum circle-y and consensus-y. This is the rules of order that really is the descendants of Parliament, what they configured for the U.S. Congress when they were setting up the rules there, and then was adopted by General Roberts when he put together these rules. So you can Google it. You can find lots of versions of it. It is copyrighted material, so you don't find actually Robert's Rules of Order that you could cite on a website anywhere. You need to buy the material from either a bookseller like Powell's Books or Amazon, or get it directly from the National Association of Parliamentarians.
Thank you so much. Or torrent file if you're broke. But yeah.
So our first chapter that we'll be going over today is on a quorum. And this is chapter 11, starting on page 345. So the definition of a quorum is the number of members who must be present in order that business can be validly transacted. And a quorum refers to the members present, not the number actually voting on a particular issue. So you can quickly understand why this is important. If you have a society of 1,000 members and 15 of them decide to meet and make decisions, it's probably not a quorum. So it has to be, you have to have two things for a meeting to be valid. You have to have a quorum, which is a sufficient number of members to make decisions, and you have to have prior notice. Going on to the next slide, most groups provide their own definition of a quorum, and it should be stated in the bylaws. In a deliberative assembly with enrolled membership whose bylaws do not specify a quorum, the quorum is a majority of all of the members. So if you have a small organization that has 20 members, and you haven't specified a quorum would be 11. However, if you have an organization with 2,500 members and you have never had 50% of them show up, then a quorum could never be achieved. So it's important that you, if at all possible, that you state what your number is for a quorum. And Robert's Rules gives some guidance on what the size of a quorum should be. In specifying a quorum, it should be as large a number of members as can reasonably be depended upon to be present at any meeting, except in very bad weather or exceptionally unfavorable conditions. So even though you have 100 members, and you know from history that 20 people generally show up, you might adjust it down a little bit so that it's 15, or you could set it at 20, but you need it. They recommend that you make it an actual number, and you set it in the bylaws rather than a percentage, because a percentage then has to be calculated every time that you meet, and it ends up being variable. And it's much easier if everyone remembers that it takes 15 members to achieve a quorum. Sometimes there's also a requirement that an officer be present, but that is not necessary. In the absence of a quorum, any business that's transacted is null and void, with the following exceptions. So you can fix a time to adjourn, you can adjourn, and you can recess. And an example of this would be to recess for 15 minutes because you need to run around to find some members to constitute a quorum. I know in my condominium we did that one time. We were having an annual meeting and we didn't have a quorum, and so we recessed for 15 minutes and we ran around banging on condo doors until we got enough people to come down and achieve a quorum. So a motion to ratify can be used to confirm actions taken when no quorum was present. So maybe the people who got together felt that it was really, really important to make a decision, like we're going to have a fair booth this year, and because the application had to be submitted. There is no requirement to approve actions taken in a meeting to which there was no quorum. So in this instance, when the group next met, there should be something in the agenda to ratify the decision to have a fair booth. And maybe the membership says, you know, we've done this for 15 years in a row and we've never had anyone come by to make it worthwhile. We really don't think it's a good use of our time and resources. And so they voted down the motion that was passed to have a fair booth, and that's perfectly proper for them to do. But it all goes back to the basic concept of majority rule.
I have a question on that, Larry, real quick.
Yeah.
So, does a quorum, like let's say you're dealing with a geographical region, can you have in your bylaws that the quorum must contain people from each one of those areas or something so that it's a fair group, you know, or can you specify stuff like that?
Yes. So it goes in the bylaws, and the bylaws have to be passed by a 2/3 vote, unless you have other rules for amending the bylaws. But if you put that in the bylaws, that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. There's in the Democratic Party of Oregon, there's things where to submit something you need not only 20 signatures or 20% of the membership to sign up, but also representation from all 5 congressional districts. Yes, as long as 2/3 of by a 2/3 vote, you amend the bylaws to state that, it's cool to do.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, because Mo Levy in the audience was talking about a situation with an HOA where they can never have enough people to do a quorum, so they can't change the bylaws. And I thought that was interesting. And then Jeffrey Pearson, I just want to say condolences, brother, on the loss of your brother. I'm sorry about that. Jeffrey was just at a memorial for his brother who died recently. So.
Oh, sorry. So we had a very interesting discussion at the Rose City unit of parliamentarians on that very issue of not being able to attain the quorum, because the chair of the organization was also associated with the Libertarian Party, and in their bylaws they had stated a percentage of the membership, which just like you described, they could never attain, so they could never change the bylaws. And so they finally said, you know, we're just going to change the bylaws anyway, and they ended up getting dragged into court and going through all kinds of litigation. And what they found out ultimately is that there was no one around to actually enforce the bylaws. So tough luck. You just have to tough it out, which is the problem that we have. You know, we are a country that is based on the rule of law, and sometimes there's no mechanism for enforcing the rule of law. And so it's really just a gentleman's agreement that we're all going to follow these rules, just like we expect the President of the United States to follow the Constitution.
And then when he doesn't and we get mad, they call for civility. So, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
At some point, Robert's rules has to go out the door when we can't get people to actually follow rules. but yeah.
It's better to elect people that follow the rules so you don't get into these awkward situations where fascism is implemented.
Right, and I'm just thinking of Roberta's rules and that whole, you know, debacle there. That's one of the reasons I think this is so important, is that we understand how to never let Roberta do that again. Right. Anyway, thank you. This is great stuff.
So the next chapter is on the order of business. This is chapter 11, page 351. So this is really all about agendas, and it's something that we've all maybe have taken for granted in the past, but it's one of those areas where you really have to be on top of what's going on because the devil's in the details. So the base assumption is that the chair has the responsibility of proposing an agenda, and it's their responsibility to make sure that everything is that the people want to talk about are built into the agenda, so you don't have to have a food fight. The assembly may amend the agenda, and the assembly has to approve the agenda. And even if the agenda is distributed in advance, it is not official until the assembly approves it. And this is really important. Everyone, you know, it's this whole thing of us being sheeple and letting our rights being taken away from us. The chair does not have the right to impose an agenda upon the membership. The chair has a responsibility to create the best agenda they can, and then the assembly gets to amend it if they need to. If the assembly decides to spend the 2 hours allocated for the meeting playing bingo, that is their prerogative if a majority votes to do so. It's really gets down to the concept of the majority owning the decision making. On the next slide is the order of business. So this is not an agenda, but this is the order of business in which organizations should run their meetings when they have not specified an order of business in their bylaws. So the first item is the reading and approval of the minutes. And the reason why this is important is because this is the record of what had gone on in the past. And from time to time, you often need to refresh your memory on things that you've decided upon previously. And that is why the minutes are so important to be kept and kept accurate. After the reading and approval of the minutes, then you get the reports of officers, boards, and standing committees. And then you get the reports of special committees. And then you have special orders. And then the second to last topic is unfinished business. And then the final topic is new business. And we're going to go through what each of these sections mean in the coming slides. So just to help out and clarity on what an agenda should look like, this is a fairly simple agenda. You can have agendas that are more elaborate, and if you want to, you can assign durations to each of the agenda items, but then that kind of ties you into completing the agenda items as you progress through the meeting. So the key things for an agenda is that you have a name of the organization that's meeting, the date and time of the meeting, and when it is called to order. You have the agenda items numbered, and then you have the topic. And I always like to put who owns each of the topics, because then if you circulate the agenda in advance, people can look through the agenda and they might have forgotten that they were on a committee that has a report due, and then this gives them an opportunity to catch up. So you might have what they call ceremonies. So a ceremony that we often do is we say the Pledge of Allegiance. Then the next one was not listed in the order of business, but it's a good thing to put on there just as a reminder to everyone that the approval of the agenda is a step that you need to do. So I always like to state that we're going to approve the agenda, and then you don't make assumptions that everyone is happy with how you're going to spend your time. The next item is the reading and approval of the minutes. And then usually you start with the reports of the officers, starting with the chair, working way down to the vice chair, and then to the treasurer, and then if the secretary or any of the other officers have anything to say. Just so you know, the report of a treasurer of the treasurer is considered a statement of fact. And so it's not a report that has to be accepted by the assembly. It's just a statement of fact. So all of this business about I move to accept the report of the chair is really just not adding any value and is wasting people's time. You have the reports of the standing committees, and then you have the reports of the special committees, and then you go to unfinished business. So the definition of unfinished business is things that have not been completed in previous meetings, and then you go into new business, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. Just a few words on the reading of the minutes. So if there are minutes from other meetings, they are read and approved in the order with the earliest. So occasionally the secretary forgets to bring copies and forgets to distribute the minutes in advance. And so you skip that and you postpone that to the next meeting. It's okay to do that, but you still need to go through the process. And so if you have prior meeting minutes, you approve them in the order in which they were generated. Corrections to minutes, it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's usually handed by unanimous consent. So if someone is making like a Scribner's error, or if the wrong person is noted as having made a motion, usually people note those kinds of things, and if no one disagrees with it, then that's considered unanimous consent. But if there's objections, then you have to treat that like a subsidiary motion. So if you recorded that something was passed on a vote of 51 to 49, when in reality it was 66 to 34, someone can say, I have a correction to the minutes, the vote was such and such, and then someone else will need to say, oh yeah, that's right, I second the motion, and then you can debate it, and then people will have to draw upon their memories, like was it 49-51 or was it 66-34, but ultimately you vote on that, and you get a majority in agreement to what the minutes should say.
I just want to comment that he's right. All of this stuff doesn't take very long if you guys get into the flow with it and just crush through it. You know, it's boring, but it's essential. You imagine if Congress had actually been looking at its own minutes for the last 50 years.
Yeah, and you know, if you have a chair that you can trust, then you know you can risk paying less attention to this stuff, but. You know, 2016 was an eye-opener for many of us. We realized that we cannot trust our leadership. We have to watch them very carefully because they are often not representing us, the people.
Well, and just you know, not to look at it like a bummer, but that's what it means to participate in your democracy. Everybody's going to screw up. We're management. It's our job to watch our employees. You know? We've just been on vacation too long. So thank you for teaching us this stuff, Larry.
So on the next slide, there is no limitation on when prior minutes can be corrected. So if you're sitting there and you're thumbing through your notebook of all your prior minutes that you carry with you to every meeting, and you notice that from 3 meetings back, something was misrepresented, you can, during this period, ask that they be corrected and treated just as we talked about, either by unanimous consent or as a secondary motion. And for anyone who's acting as a secretary, I highly recommend that you read Robert's rules on how minutes should be written. We're going to have a session on minutes writing and what should be included and what should be excluded coming up in the future, so stay tuned for that. But in brief, you do not record the conversations and debate that goes on between people on the floor. No one really cares when the minutes are said and done. What they do care about is what motions were made, what the wording was of the motions, and how the motions were handled. That's the kind of stuff that you need to research. We had a bylaws change that was screwed up royally in 2016 in the Democratic Party of Oregon. And depending on how you view the the intent, regardless of how you view the intent, we could not trace back through the minutes what had happened. We showed up at the third quarter meeting, and the minutes that were distributed were not the minutes that were distributed in advance, and the secretary had not noted anything that had been changed, and what they had added was something that required prior notice in a prior meeting, and no one could ever remember that being noted in the prior meeting. So where did the question was, where did this come from, and why is it there? And did they basically follow proper procedure in proposing a bylaws change? And the answer is no, and that ended up screwing up the election for the DNC members that fall, and we took a long drawn-out floor fight to get things put back to where they should have been at a subsequent meeting. So it's really important that the minutes correctly reflect what was decided in the meeting. So just on the reports of officers, if an officer makes a recommendation, that officer should not move its implementation. So if I'm the chair and well, the chair shouldn't do that anyway. So assume that the vice chair was asked to do something like investigate whether or not the book should be audited. The chair or the vice chair, it would not be appropriate for them to move that an audit be taken. What they should do, and any of you have attended these meetings have heard this language, they would say something like, I would entertain a motion to have our books audited. And then someone from the floor, from the assembly, where all the power lies, says, oh, okay, I move that we audit our books. And then someone else says, I second it, and then you can debate it and vote it up or down. But it's not appropriate for an officer to move action in the assembly. Committee reports are different, though, because a committee chair is in charge of a committee, and a committee is generally more than one person. And so you have several people who have been working on something, coming up with a recommendation, and then the chair can then move whatever recommendations has come out of the committee. So that's cool to do. Hope that makes sense to anyone. If that doesn't make sense, please type it in the chat, and John will rein me in.
Or go buy your book and read it. But yeah, I'll absolutely. No, I'll clarify if we need to.
The concept of unfinished business is sometimes called old business, but it's not old business. It's either unfinished business that you hadn't completed, or it's new business. So unfinished business refers to questions that have come up over from a previous meeting as a result of that meeting's having adjourned without completing that order of business. So it truly is unfinished business. So you need to disposition motions. So either they're voted down, or they're passed, or they're referred to a committee, or they're amended, but something happens to them. If they are still pending at the end of the meeting and there's an open questions that need to be resolved, then that goes into the category of unfinished business. It's not that someone had been talking about a picnic at the previous meeting, but it was not entertained by the floor or anything. You can't call that unfinished business and try to drag it out of the background and put it on the floor under that heading. So new business is also an area you have to watch for. So the last agenda item in the standard order of business is called new business. Chairs who don't want to mess with the interference of the membership sometimes leaves this agenda item off. If they do, you should amend the agenda at the beginning of the meeting saying, point of order, the new business is left off the agenda, please add it. And if there is not a order of business defined in the bylaws that says otherwise, this is a item that is specified in Robert's Rules of Order, and they have to add that. Members can introduce new items of business or can move to take from the table any matter on the table. So we've done this a couple of times at the State Central Committee, where we get to new business and we make motions. The reason why we do this is because we do not trust the leadership sometimes to not deep six what we're trying to do. And so we waited under new business and we moved it, and it has to be dispositioned. Chairs cannot prevent the making of legitimate motions or deprive members of the right to introduce legitimate business. So the chair's role is to administer the meeting, is not to make judgment calls on the actions that are going on, or overlaying their value system on the activities of the organization. So taking up the business out of its proper order. So agendas are adopted by a majority vote. So you get to that point of the agenda where you have the approval of the agenda. It just takes a majority vote to approve it, and that basically says a majority of the people in the room want to follow this order of business. When the adoption is pending, it is subject to amendment by majority vote. So like I said, if the chair does not want to put new business on, and they're supposed to, you can say, I move that we add new business to the end of the agenda. Someone else should second it, and hopefully the majority will support you in the motion that you made. That would pass by a majority vote. Once the agenda has been adopted, it takes a 2/3 vote to then deviate from it. And the last point is very interesting because you often see this happen. The chair cannot depart from the prescribed order of business, which only the assembly can do by at least 2/3 vote. The chair cannot say, oh, we're getting to the end of the meeting, we're going to skip this item and we're just going to go to the last item. They cannot do that. And there's ways of handling that. You have to say, point of order, I call for the orders of the day, which means you have to stick to the agenda, and they have to do that. And there's ways to handle chairs that do not execute their job properly, and we will lump that in with the topic of appealing for the ruling of the chair.
This is all really cool. You got some great comments in the audience, Larry, and I want to mention something that well, a lot of people are saying this really should have been taught in schools. Why aren't we teaching this in our schools?
Yes.
That's how you know we don't have a democracy anymore, folks. They don't want you to know this stuff. Schultz 100 is saying, how do those people know this? He was talking about watching Senate the other day and something going on. I was like, how would you deal with that? Do our representatives, like Ocasio, if she wins, does she have a responsibility to learn Robert's rules, or do those people know any of that crap for real?
Well, you often hear about certain senators who have specialized on the rules of the Senate, and I think Senator Byrd was one of those. He knew the Senate rules forward and backwards, and so yes, and it allows you to get things done, because if you are following the rules, people cannot object. We had a senator, state senator from Vermont, visiting us at the end of last year, and we were talking about that, and he said, yeah, one of the first things I did when I got elected to the Vermont legislature was I studied the rules of order, and I made myself an expert, and I was able to get things through because I understood the rules on how things were handled. We've often been astonished at committees inside the Oregon legislature where we know, or at least a majority of the members of a committee have stated that they support something, but that item is not moved out of the committee. And I've not read Mason's Rules of Order, which is what they are based on, but one would hope that chairs of committees cannot override the will of a majority of the committee. So if that is a rule, that a majority of the committee can move something out of the committee onto the floor for a vote, you have to know the procedures for doing that. And this is exactly why we're setting up the statewide organization for studying this, because there is no other way. It's very difficult to study this stuff on your own. I'm finding that people who just read the book and take that knowledge cold without talking with people who understand the implications of Robert's rules and the fundamental principles of parliamentary procedure often don't get it interpreted correctly. And so we're finding, one of the values of attending the groups here in Portland, and what we hope the electronic group will be, is a way for people to bring in issues that they face in their local organizations, regardless of whatever party it belongs to or organization, and discuss them and get a knowledge share of more experienced parliamentarians who are used to interpreting these things.
That's so absolutely beautiful, and the audience is in agreement with you on needing to do this. Just some other comments. Dennis, German citizen, says, I had 4 years politics civics in school. It's mandatory. Let's see, Schultze 100 says, can we explain why we're not getting, where we're being denied this in modern times? Never mind, I know. Dewey Bueno says, and I'm guessing this is in reference to, our Senate and reps and stuff. They probably learn by doing after they get pissed. And I think that's the truth. We can read the books, but it's practice that's going to make us good at this stuff, right? So, powerful stuff. I'm glad people are getting involved.
We were talking with the winner of the primary for our district for the House last weekend, and I was encouraging her to get Mason's Rules of Order so she understands how this stuff is handled. And her campaign manager assured us that the legislature takes all of their new members through a orientation session where all of this is trained. I still would not trust them 100%.
Could you imagine that? You never get to object. You never raise your hand. Yes, these are our rules.
And especially in the situations where you have the leadership and control of the money that is used to reelect everyone's campaigns, it's really a sordid mess. And so it takes legislators with a lot of strength and fortitude to stand up for their rights.
Agreed.
Any other comments?
No, they're just there's how many people we got here? 16 people watching right now. Thank you all for being here. 53 playbacks, and this is great. Keep going.
So the next section is called Assignment of the Floor in Debate. This is chapter 12. So, this is good knowledge for both the chair and for people who are in the assembly, because you need to know when you have the right to be recognized. So members must be recognized before they can make motions or speak in debate. So this is one of the foundational duties of a chair, is that they control the flow of business on the floor, and they recognize people to speak. And you need to be recognized to speak before you start speaking. There's a few exceptions for that, but that's the basic rule. And having said that, the chair must recognize any member who seeks the floor when entitled to it. So when there is no business on the floor, you can raise your hand and introduce motions. And once you have stated your motion, whatever it is, the chair should state for what purpose does the member rise, which is the formal way of saying, what do you want? And then you should either state your motion or suggest them they turn on the air conditioning or whatever the issue is that you want to speak. Next slide, obtaining the floor. When assigning the floor, a member may use it for any purpose, any proper purpose. No member who has already had the floor in debate on the immediately pending question is entitled to it again on the same day for debate on the same question, so long as a member who has not spoken on that question claims the floor. So that's a lot of words. But we've all been in meetings where the chair lets the debate between two people go on interminably, and the rest of the group really would like to move on, but everyone's sitting there and they're so polite that they don't want to, offend anyone. But this is one of those rules where it helps control that. So there's a couple other rules about speaking. But what this one says is that you can't speak on something when someone else wants to speak about it. It prevents people from hogging the floor. On the next slide, under obtaining the floor, if possible, the chair should alternate between those favoring and those opposing the measure. So if you have a small enough group and the chair is pretty much familiar with how everyone feels, and the issue of the state fair booth has come up one more time, it would be great if the chair could sort of suss out who we're for and who is against, and then choose alternating opinions. So everyone gets a sort of a balanced input of the information, so that when they vote, they can base it on a balanced set of information. The practice that we sometimes see is that there's this rule that you line up in two queues, one for and one against, and when you run out of a speaker in one, the others have to stop speaking. This is a curtailment of debate, and it has to be codified in a special rule that is written down in the rules of order along with the bylaws. And it has to be passed by a 2/3 vote, because it is an abridgment of your right to speak. I think I need to research this and where we're currently encountering that. But just because there's 15 people that want to speak in favor of the fair booth and there's only one person that wants to speak against it, doesn't mean that the other 14 people can't speak, because you have the right to speak about it. And if it's not balanced, it just means that more people are in favor of the fair booth than against. Well, but they can't be held back from speaking.
A question on that, Larry, because you're defining a process I kind of watched at the convention, right, where Valdez Bravo went back and forth between pros and cons on different legislative items or action items. But can they limit? Like, okay, we have 400 people on either side. We really don't need to hear 400 testimonies. Let's limit it to this many and move on. Or is
not if the assembly has not agreed to that rule.
Yeah, okay.
So if the assembly agrees to that by a 2/3 vote, yeah, you can impose those kinds of limits. But in the absence of those things, a chair can't stand up there and say, oh, it's 4 o'clock. We only have the room until 4:15. We got to speed it up, so we're going to do this. They can do that, and you can be sheeple and let them do that, but you can also object to it and say, point of order, it is inappropriate for you to make those kinds of limitations on the speech.
Very cool. Thank you for that clarification. And just one other thing that you might be addressing already, and please do it later if it is, but these rules are for members. When we have somebody like there's a great video of the guy addressing the Seattle City Council after they folded, and he starts off, "Hey, bootlickers," which I don't know if that has anything to do with Robert's rules, or good or bad, but are there any rules of these that apply to just the citizen going to a council meeting that we can use, or you know what I mean?
Well, so in a council meeting, the assembly is the 5 council members, and the public is there to observe. And so in those circumstances, they open up debate to the floor and allow people to come up and make comments. And then they close the comment period from the floor, and then they go back to debating amongst themselves.
Okay.
So in those circumstances, it's the council that is the assembly.
All right. All right.
And no, they can't use terms like bootlicker, because that is a breach of decorum.
By the citizens or by the council?
It's inappropriate to use terms like bootlicker because what you really are debating ideas and concepts, and you try to keep the emotion out of the meeting so you can make rational decisions based on fact.
Well, that's not fun. I like the way the Brits do it better. They insult each other and yell at each other, and quite frankly, the entire city council deserved to be called bootlickers, so it's kind of appropriate. What happens when it's factual? Never mind. Moving
on. So on the next slide, when a member has been assigned the floor and has begun to speak, they cannot be interrupted by another member or by the chair, except for a limited number of exceptions. So you have the right to speak. If you have the floor, you have the right to speak. Any questions of that material before we go to the next chapter?
No, everybody's just having a good discussion about options. Would I have to go to law school to be able to know this? So I don't need to go to law school, Schulte says. No, you don't. Just need to read a book and practice, I guess.
And interestingly, that sometimes people make the assumption that this is material taught in law school, but attorneys never study parliamentary procedure. They study law, which is a whole different thing. Parliamentary procedure is about democracy and the implementation of democracy, and they never crack the book on this material. So I think that was one of the mistakes that was made in the appointment of a chair of the Rules Committee, because the appointment was an attorney, but she didn't even own a copy of Robert's Rules of Order when she got the position, and she said, "Oh well, I'll just wait for the e version to come out." Well, unfortunately, the Roberts Foundation that controls this stuff is not that hip, and there's no e version coming out imminently. I think she finally relented and got a copy, but no, just because you have a law degree and you went to law school doesn't mean you know anything about the principles of democracy.
Yeah. Real quick in the audience, they're talking about Bavarian politics. I'm not sure why. And Jeffrey Pearson wants to learn this of Bavarian politics. And just so everybody is aware, the cover is not our Congress, although it would be great if they were this active. Most of our Congress is sleeping. They have like a nappy rule. But this is the Ukrainian government, and I'm fairly certain this is a breach of Robert's rules in some way. So.
You're referring to the picture?
Yes, I was showing a picture. So, yeah.
The next chapter is Rules Governing Debate. And this is chapter 12, starting on page 385. So the right to speak cannot be interrupted except by a 2/3 vote. And the way this is done, and if you've been to any of these meetings, you've heard people shout out the word question. Well, there's a process for doing this which must be adhered to. So the whole thing of calling the question means let's end debate and go to a vote, and it's often abbreviated to the word question that's shouted out. However, if you want to end debate and call the question, you have to raise your hand and be recognized by the chair, and then 2/3 of the members have to agree. If the debate has been going on forever, and you have a room of, just like you were saying, John, we have 500 people in the room, we've got 30 people lined up on each side that have not yet spoken, and it looks like everyone has repeated every argument several times already, and no one's bringing up any new information. They just want to state their piece. You can call the question and end debate because it's not really adding any value.
Okay, so that's what I've heard then, is somebody doing that. It's like, can we be done with this? All right, good. So there is a way to stop the horror.
Yes. If the majority does not want to listen to this go on, they can stop it. So that's how it's done. If you make a motion, like I move that we have a booth at the county fair this year, once it's seconded and the motion is repeated by the chair, you're entitled to speak first. So you get to lay out your argument about why you need a booth at the state fair. There is no such thing as gaveling through a measure. So those of you who have seen the state convention in Nevada from 2016 saw the chair gavel through a couple of times, I believe. That's not appropriate behavior. And the right of members to debate cannot be cut off by the chairs attempting to put the question. So again, if you only have the room until 4 o'clock and the chair is starting to get nervous about having to pay an extra hour's rental for the room or whatever, it's still not appropriate for the chair to put the question and end debate. We continue to put up with a similar situation at the standing committee meetings in the Democratic Party of Oregon at the quarterly meetings. They schedule a 1-hour meeting that should be 2 hours long, and we get to the end of the first hour, and some staffer walks in and says, "Oh, you got to end the meeting. The next group's ready to meet, and they're outside the door, and they want to come in." The group meeting does not have to adjourn. They can adjourn and re-adjourn somewhere else. they can recess and re-adjourn somewhere else, but they do not have to end the meeting unless a majority of them agree to. And so far, a majority of the Rules Committee has gone along with this. At the next meeting, I've suggested that we schedule 3 hours because we have a lot of material to cover, and it'll be interesting to see what happens if they try to shut us down again. The reasons why they want to shut us down is so we don't talk about things like throwing legislators off the executive committee of the Democratic Party of Oregon because people will feel awkward or embarrassed. And sorry, but if the membership wants to do that, that is their prerogative.
Yeah, that won you a lot of brownie points. I was reading an article on that one. Yeah. But that's democracy. It's not neat and clean, as somebody said earlier, right? This is what it takes.
So length and number of speeches. If no special rule exists relating to the length of speeches, a member can speak for no longer than 10 minutes unless they obtain consent of the assembly. And so maybe you have a really great speaker who has been speaking passionately for 10 minutes about why you need a booth at the state fair. And if the group wants to hear 10 more minutes of them talking about this, they can allow them to do so. But if the group doesn't agree to that, then the speaker has to stop. So, hopefully within 10 minutes, you can get your arguments conveyed. And the final note here is the rights in regard to debate are not transferable. So, the Senate and of Congress and the House of Representatives have their own rules of order, and you've probably seen them transfer their minutes. So the chair will say, everyone has 3 minutes to speak, and so you have the first speaker going, well, blah, blah, blah for 1 minute, and they will say, and I yield my remaining 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Maryland. That is not a rule of order under Robert's Rules of Order. That's something specific to how the Congress runs. So if you have 10 minutes to debate and you've spoken for 5, but your friend can talk forever, you cannot say, I yield my remaining 5 minutes to the gentleman from Jackson County. The balance of your 10 minutes expires.
Hey, I'm going to rudely interrupt because Schultze is all fired up about this and wants to go get the rule book and start reading on his own. But can you tell everybody again where to go so they can sign up for your virtual discussion group and really stay connected?
So the best place to sign up is a acronym called pdpo.org. And what I have there are a sign up to join the study group. I have a button to click if you want to take one of the exams, so we can make arrangements for you. And then I have links to both the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians and the National Association of Parliamentarians. So it's dpdo.org.
It's PDPO.
PDPO.
PDPO.org. Thank you.
P like parliamentarian. And then also under length and number of speeches, unless a special rule provides otherwise, this is the next slide, members can speak no more than twice to the same question on the same day. So if your chair is not doing a good job and you have 2 people going at it and they have spoken for more than twice, then you need to raise your hand and say, point of order, I believe the members from South Slope have exhausted their opportunities to speak, and the chair should shut them down. This also would help control the length of meetings. No one likes meetings that go on forever. And periodically you see meetings devolve into a discussion between 2 people that are very passionate about something, and the rest of the room that has beyond caring about this topic. But the rule is that no one should speak more than twice. And if you've never enforced a rule like this, it's probably a good idea to talk about this before you spring it on them, because then they think like their rights are being taken away, even though it says it flat out in the book. But when I run meetings, I like to explain things in advance so everyone understands what the rules are, and then you don't have riots break out.
Just a couple thoughts on that, because I love this. Basically what you're saying is 2 annoying people, you could shut the hell up. But is there like just a top 10 list of basic rule. It sounds to me like maybe at the meeting that needs to be up as on an overhead, right? Here's the basic rules: 2 times to speak, this and that, this and this, right? Do you have one of those, or is there one? Do you think that's a good idea?
I do not. That is a great idea. I know I've done that in the past, and I did that with the Clatsop County Democrats a couple of meetings ago, just so everyone understood the ground rules.
Sweet.
We just, this is the month where all the precinct committee persons take their positions for the next 2 years, and there's been an influx of new people. And so this would be a really great topic to review all across the state and all of the county party meetings, because you're going to have new people there. You will have people who are completely unfamiliar with this stuff, and it would be so great if they understood the rules so they can effectively participate.
Yeah, and Schultze has a question. No, this is Dennis. I'm sorry. Question from Germany, and this is a good question, and maybe this is in Mason's rules. How long? Who regulates how long Congress peoples gets to speak? Everybody up there. Or do you know how long they get to speak?
Well, what they seem to do is they, when they go into one of these, especially something that's contentious, the rules committee gets together and they formulate the rules for that topic. So if you've earlier, I don't know if it was the immigration issue or it was the issue before that, they said, we're going to allocate 3 days for debate, and the rules are going to be, you can speak for 3 minutes, and they kind of make up the rules depending on the topic and the, where they are in the election cycle and a bunch of variables, but they make up the rules in advance so everyone knows what to follow.
Okay, so this is like when they said we're only going to debate Obamacare for 1,000,000 years and we're only going to debate the wall never, or whatever, like right, when they set those kind of things.
Yes.
Okay. So unfortunately,
and again, Congress, the United States of America was the first democracy that was fabricated out of nothing, right? And that's why it was so revolutionary. And so, what Jefferson did, because he was the first vice president and he was in charge of the Senate, the first thing he did was he sat down and studied what went on in Parliament and came up with the first rules of order for the Senate. And the Constitution actually says both houses comes up with their own rules. So the House also had someone doing an equivalent exercise on their side. And it's those rules that they modify. One of the things that they modified in the past couple of years is the number of votes taken to confirm a Supreme Court justice. If you remember, the last one the Republicans did is they reduced it down to a majority from 60 votes to confirm. And that's how they think they're going to ram through the current appointee. But they did that because they can do that because a majority of the Republicans agreed to change the rule.
And they can do that because they control the House and Senate, which sucks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Good answer. Thank you.
Decorum in debate. So this goes back to calling people bootlickers. You need to confine your remarks to the merits of the pending question. Refrain from attacking a member's motive. Address all remarks through the chair. So if you are in debate and you're looking at the person who just last spoke, or someone who's at the meeting that you loathe, that is not appropriate. You should be speaking through the chair. So the whole idea is that you are bringing facts and thoughts into the meeting, not emotions, and you're presenting it to the chair, and everyone else is listening to the debate.
What if the person is an asshat and it's a fact?
It might be, but it's not a decorous thing to do to point that out.
Okay, thank you.
I can see the strain of these meetings are going to be tough for you, John.
This is why I do what I do, and I don't spend a lot of time in meetings.
Avoid the use of members' names. This is why you see in Congress people refer to the gentleman from Alabama or the gentlewoman from Vermont. They don't talk about people's names because that personalizes the comments, and you don't want to piss people off. You want to keep the debate rational.
Okay, but you just used a descriptive, gentleman. So that means I could be like the Nazi from, Nevada, or right?
I think we both know the difference.
Okay, fine. Just levity. That's all.
The term gentleman is not. Well, I mean, there are people who, when I use the term ma'am to someone that's like, under 30, then they get all ruffled.
They should.
Sorry, I'm just trying to be polite. I'm gonna,
showing your age there, Larry.
Showing my age. Give me a break. So yeah, I mean, you have to be very careful about how you use any kind of terminology in referring to anybody.
It's true.
The person from Alabama.
And this is hard for, I think, angry Americans. I think the reason I want to bring it up with decorum is because angry Americans right now are like, really? Really? You're asking us to be all nice and talk? You call you gentlemen and bullshit while you're like murdering people and bombing 7 nations and putting babies in cages. But the problem is Larry's right about the breakdown of logic, rational conversation. You really got to keep the emotion out of it as much as possible to maintain rationality, even though you're dealing with assholes.
Going into Mexican restaurants where people have been throwing Mexicans out of the country and disturbing their dinner is not covered by Robert's Rules of Order. So go for it.
There you go. That's Fight It in the Streets. Real quick, just to mention for Mike McCabe, extraordinary, wonderful guy who has like a massive amount of views on our interview. Love to have Mike back. And it looks, who was saying that they just talked to him? Was it Schultze? And he gave a shout out to Uphill Media. So thank you, Mike. Looking forward to talking to you again. You're like some crazy phenomenon out there in Wisconsin. So talk to you soon. All right, back to you.
And the final one is refrain from disturbing the assembly. So don't take your bag of Cheetos and sit in the middle of the meeting and start crunching away when people are trying to focus on the debate.
Oh, so many good ideas coming out of that.
So rules against the chair's participation. Chairs have feelings too. And however, if they can't be impartial, they shouldn't be a chair. The chair should have nothing to say on the merits of pending questions. The chair is there to run the debate and make sure that everyone gets to speak their piece, but do that impartially. To participate in debate, there's rules about this. So the chair must relinquish the chair, which is what is called the person that's running, the presiding officer, and turn it over to either the highest ranking vice chair who has not spoken on the question. So, if Jean, the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon, wants to speak on something, she's more than welcome to, but she has to turn this over to our first vice chair, Valdez Bravo, if he has not spoken on this issue. However, if he's already spoken on this issue as well, or has made his intentions known, so he's no longer perceived as unbiased, then they would turn it over to Lupita, who's the second vice chair. And then, assuming that she has not made her feelings known about something, then she could preside while the chair joins the assembly in the debate.
Comment from the Peanut Gallery, Jeffrey Pearson. No chairs were thrown in this video.
And if they can't find an officer to do this, then they need to find someone qualified to run the meeting in the assembly. And hopefully, there's someone who's familiar enough with this stuff that they could take over presiding. And the presiding officer should not return to presiding the meeting until the pending main question has been disposed of. So if they want to debate, then they go out and sit in with the other members until that motion has been dispositioned, and then they can go back and take over the meeting again. So that's the end of that chapter. Any final questions?
No questions. Just everybody's really excited about what they're learning here, and Schultze's talking about how he was in chat with Mike McCabe dissing the president, and you got a lot of people excited. We got 20 people watching right now. 74 playbacks. Thank you all for being here and learning more about your democracy. And thank you, Larry, for teaching us this stuff that we were supposed to learn in school.
Yes. So once again, we would be delighted if you would join our new electronic unit. If you go to PDPO and sign up, we will have your contact information and we will get you roped into this. The parliamentarians are actually the most polite group of people I've ever come across in my life. I went to the convention last year, and I'm going to the convention this coming September to learn more about this from the core people. The last convention was really cool because the descendants of Roberts, General Roberts, was at the meeting and spoke to the assembly. So we would love for you to join the group and start disseminating this information, because we are a country founded on the rule of law, and so either we follow the rules or we turn into the rest of the world where you resort to guns and knives, and we don't want to do that. So it's best if we can follow the rules of order, and this is the topic which addresses that. The next session that we have is going to be on the core principles of parliamentary procedure, because unless you understand those, the rest of the material doesn't make as much sense. And I realize that when I put this together, that these underlying concepts have to be understood before you can fully understand the other topics. And really, that's something that you have to get down in order to really pass the exams, because if you understand the underlying concepts, you can understand what the tests are getting at when they have these questions that seem like they're all the same. The one after that, we're going to talk about handling of motions. So there's the process of how to handle a motion, and then the next one after that, we'll be talking about the types of motions. So in addition to the main motion, which is I move that we have a booth at the state fair, there's also motions like I move to table this topic, or I move to refer this topic to a committee. So we'll be going through those types of motions, and then we will go through a session on how to write minutes. And if you have other ideas for topics, please let us know. These are I did a survey earlier, and these are the topics that surfaced to the top. But really, we're just going to continue having these training sessions. And the beauty of what we're doing today is that I will never have to revisit this topic in terms of a recording again, because we can now put this as a link to the website, and if you want to review any of the 4 topics we watched today, you can just go to the link and bring this up.
Yeah, and I'll be chopping this up into segments so you guys can watch it in different portions. And there's 2 different things going on here, though, Larry. Are we gonna combine the weekly live stream and your group, or are you gonna do the group and then we're gonna do the live stream version of it?
That's not my decision. So we are in the process of forming the Cascadia E-Unit right now. We have 6 members of the National Association of Parliamentarians who are doing that. And so once at our next meeting, which is this coming Thursday, we will be electing officers and then carrying out business, like deciding how to proceed with this going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, that's it, everybody, right?
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, guys. You've been a great audience. I did pick a song to go out with, Larry. I did pick something. So, hi, everybody, back here. I grabbed, well, Larry mentioned little boxes. I asked, what's a song about rules? And I could only find songs about breaking rules. I didn't think that made sense. And so this is Malvina Reynolds, Little Boxes. Please tell us just a minute about this, Larry.
Oh, this was a song that if you're a boomer, you probably remember, because it was a top 10. But it's all about the conformity coming out of the 50s. And it's a song about life and conformity. And to me, it really talks about where we are now as being sheeple and accepting direction from people who shouldn't be giving us direction, or at least is trying to curtail our rights in our society.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Join us again.
Little boxes on the hillside, little boxes made of ticky-tacky, little boxes on the hillside, little boxes all the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. and the people in the houses all went to the university, where they were put in boxes and they came out all the same. And there's doctors and lawyers and business executives, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. And they all play on the golf course and drink their martinis dry, and they all have pretty children, and the children go to school, and the children go to summer camp, and then to the university, where they are put in boxes and they come out all the same. And the boys go into business and marry and raise a family in boxes made of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky, and they all look just the same.